The bar was my escape, a place to drown out the week's stress and lose myself in the crowd. That night, everything was perfect. The music, the laughter, the anonymity. I sipped my drink and let the atmosphere pull me in. It felt like a rare moment of peace, a night where nothing could go wrong. But life has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? Bars have this strange way of making you feel both invisible and seen at the same time. You're surrounded by people, yet no one really knows you. I like that. It felt freeing to exist in a space where no one was prying into my life or asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. The dim lights, the bass of the music vibrating in my chest, and the hum of conversation, it was all so intoxicating. I leaned against the counter, swirling my drink, watching strangers dance and talk, as if nothing outside these four walls mattered. I wasn't there to meet anyone or chase some fleeting connection. I was there to clear my head, to let loose, to forget. Nights like these were rare, a moment where I wasn't haunted by overthinking, regrets, or echoes of the past. I told myself I deserved this peace, this small slice of normalcy, where the only thing I had to worry about was whether I'd order another drink. But peace, I've learned, is often a fragile thing. One second I was in my bubble of contentment, and the next it popped with brutal precision. It started with a laugh, a sound so familiar that it sliced through the noise of the bar and hit me square in the chest. I froze, my drink halfway to my lips, as my gaze darted across the room. It felt like slow motion when my eyes landed on him. Dan. My heart plummeted so hard it felt like it hit the floor. I blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the dim lights, a cruel joke my tired mind was playing on me. But no, it was him. Standing there laughing, drink in hand, as if he hadn't single-handedly shattered me once upon a time. He looked different, yet exactly the same. Time had softened some edges, but his smirk was still there, that same arrogant tilt of his head. My pulse quickened, and a rush of anger, hurt, and disbelief surged through me. Out of all the places, out of all the nights, why here? Why now? I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen him, but my eyes stayed glued to him like a moth to a flame. Every memory I had buried came rushing back, clawing its way to the surface. My stomach twisted, my chest tightened, and for a brief moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. It's strange how one person can hold so much power over you, even after all this time. I thought I was past this, that I had moved on. But there he was, dragging me right back to a version of myself I thought I'd left behind. The bar, once my sanctuary, suddenly felt suffocating. Seeing him was like a slap to the face, a jarring reminder of betrayal I had worked so hard to bury. Dan wasn't just any ex, he was the ex, the one who had promised me the world but left me drowning in lies and deceit. It's funny how memories can flood back so vividly, even when you've spent so much time trying to suppress them. I could still remember the first time I caught him in a lie. It was something small, insignificant, even a white lie about where he'd been one night. I brushed it off back then, convinced myself it was harmless. But the thing about small cracks is that they grow, and before you know it, everything shatters. Dan wasn't just a cheater. He was a master manipulator. He had this way of making me question my own reality, turning every confrontation into an argument where somehow I was the one at fault. Looking at him across the bar, I felt that old familiar sting of self-blame creeping in, like a phantom limb. Could I have done something differently? Was there something I missed? But deep down I knew better. The problem was never me, it was him. I could still picture the day the truth unraveled. It wasn't cinematic or overly dramatic. It was quiet, painful, and far too real. I remember scrolling through messages I wasn't supposed to see, messages that painted a picture I couldn't unsee. The casual intimacy he shared with someone else, the pet names, the secrets, all of it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. And yet, when confronted, he had the audacity to act offended, as if I was the villain for invading his so-called privacy. That night, I remember sitting in my car after he stormed out, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, trying to process how someone I loved could be so cruel. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest edges of pain, and eventually I moved on, or at least I thought I did. Until now, seeing him standing there so nonchalant, and bothered, made my blood boil. Did he even remember what he did to me? Did he carry even an ounce of guilt? Or had he simply wiped the slate clean and moved on without a second thought? It was infuriating how someone could wreak havoc on your life and then just exist, as if none of it had ever happened. He laughed, tossed his head back, and clinked glasses with someone I didn't recognize. It was such a simple act, so mundane, but to me it felt like mockery. My chest felt tight, and for a moment I thought about leaving, just walking out, getting in my car, and driving far away from the ghost of my past. But something kept me rooted in place. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the quiet voice in the back of my head whispering that running away wouldn't change anything. Dan had already taken so much from me: my trust, my peace, my ability to believe in love without second-guessing every word. I wouldn't let him take this night from me too, but standing there frozen in place, I realized that moving on isn't always about forgetting. Sometimes it's about facing the thing that broke you and refusing to let it control you any longer. My first instinct was to leave, to walk out and pretend I hadn't seen him, but something stopped me. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't the same broken person he left behind. I stayed, but my mind was a whirlwind. Memories of his betrayal tangled with the strength I'd fought to rebuild. Part of me wanted to confront him, to ask him if he even remembered the destruction he left in his wake. How could he stand there, so casual, as if he hadn't ripped my world apart? But I knew better than to let him have the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. Instead, I took a deep breath, pushing back the waves of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. It wasn't worth it. Nothing I said could undo what had already been done. Dan had made his choice when he lied, when he betrayed my trust. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into that toxic space, not when I had worked so hard to claw my way out. But it wasn't easy. The memories of those endless nights where I questioned myself when I begged for answers he refused to give rushed back like a flood I couldn't control. What hurt the most wasn't just his infidelity, but how little he seemed to care. The way he walked away from everything we had, without a second thought. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I should go up to him, to stand in front of him and make him face the damage he'd done, to ask why, to get some kind of closure. But I stopped myself. I didn't need closure from him. The truth was, the only closure I needed was from myself. I turned my back on him, focusing instead on the people around me. The noise of the bar, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all felt distant, like I was watching the world through a foggy window. I tried to refocus, to distract myself. My friends were still laughing, enjoying the night. Their carefree energy was contagious, but the shadow of Dan's presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I refused to look back. It was almost as if he was waiting for a reaction, trying to gauge whether I would crumble under the weight of what had happened between us. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the same girl who would break down in front of him. The longer I stood there, the more I realized that I didn't owe him anything. No apology, no explanation, and certainly no emotional outburst. I didn't need to prove anything to him. The person I was now wasn't the person he had left behind. The woman standing in the bar, refusing to be dragged back into his chaos, was stronger than any version of me he ever knew. I forced myself to smile, to laugh along with my friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I wasn't letting him steal this moment from me, not again. And in that small act of defiance, I felt something shift inside me. It was the first step toward taking back what he had stolen from me, the power to move on, to let go, and to finally put the past where it belonged, far behind me. As the night wore on, I decided to reclaim my narrative. I wouldn't let Dan ruin another moment of my life. He wasn't worth my anger or my energy. So I focused on my friends, on the music, on anything but him. The familiar warmth of their laughter, the shared jokes, the easy camaraderie, it all reminded me why I was there in the first place. I didn't come to the bar to get lost in the past, to let an old wound reopen. I was there to be present, to enjoy the night, to live in the now, and despite Dan's presence, I wasn't about to let him take that from me. It was like flipping a switch. Once I decided that he wasn't going to have any power over me, everything started to feel different. The music felt louder, the energy in the room brighter, and for a brief moment I felt truly free again. It was funny how quickly the weight of his presence started to fade when I refused to let it control me. But the universe wasn't done testing me. At one point, I felt a shift in the air, a change in the rhythm of the room. I turned slightly, and there he was. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything went still. My breath caught in my throat as I locked eyes with him. I don't know what I expected, maybe for him to look guilty or remorseful, maybe for him to pretend he hadn't seen me. But instead, there was a flicker of recognition. His gaze didn't waver as it had earlier when he pretended I was just another stranger in the bar. No, this time it was different. I could see it in his eyes, something like regret, or maybe it was guilt, but it was there. For a second, I almost thought I saw him soften, but that didn't change anything. The past was the past, and his guilt wasn't enough to undo what he had done. I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge the unspoken conversation hanging between us. Instead, I held my ground. I wasn't going to react the way he expected. I wasn't going to let him see how much his presence still affected me. Because deep down, I knew that whatever he thought he saw in my eyes, whatever he was hoping for closure, an apology, maybe even an outburst, it wasn't coming. I gave him nothing. Not a glare, not a smile, not a word. I turned back to my friends as if he had never existed. The choice I made to walk away, to not let his presence dictate my emotions, was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. There was something incredibly liberating in that moment. I realized that by not reacting, I had taken control of the situation. He had no hold over me anymore. I wasn't some girl waiting for him to acknowledge the pain he caused. I wasn't waiting for him to apologize or explain himself. I had moved past him. And it was in that small, quiet moment that I understood just how much I had grown. By the end of the night, I felt lighter. Seeing Dan wasn't the closure I expected, but it reminded me of how far I had come. His betrayal no longer defined me. I was more than the person he tried to break. Walking out of that bar, I realized something important: the past only has power over you if you let it. And as for Dan, he's just a chapter one closed, a reminder of what I've survived and how much better I deserve. I could feel the weight of the evening lift off my shoulders with every step I took away from him. It was as if the final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. When I first saw him, I thought I would crumble, that the memories of everything he had done to me would come rushing back like a tidal wave, sweeping me under. But instead, I stood tall. I faced him, not out of confrontation, but out of recognition, recognizing the past for what it was and refusing to let it dictate my future. I had spent so long haunted by the image of him, by the wreckage he left in his wake, that I almost forgot how far I'd come since then. I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't that girl who cried herself to sleep, wondering what went wrong, why she wasn't enough. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, piece by piece, and seeing Dan there, pretending like nothing had ever happened, only made me realize how much stronger I had become. I had learned to trust again, to love myself again, and most importantly, to stop letting someone else's mistakes define my happiness. The night was a turning point, not because of anything he did, but because of everything I had done for myself. I had learned to let go of the anger, the bitterness, and the regret. I had learned that moving forward wasn't about forgetting, it was about accepting that some people are just meant to be part of your past, not your future. Dan was part of my past, and he didn't deserve to have any part in my future. As I left the bar, the cold air hit my face, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was the kind of peace you can only find when you let go of something that has been holding you down for far too long. I was no longer carrying the weight of his betrayal. It didn't have the power to ruin my nights or haunt my thoughts anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of closure I needed all along. Because when you stop waiting for someone else to fix what they broke, you realize you've been the one holding the pieces all along. And in the end, I was stronger, freer, and better off without him.